Have you noticed that as you get older, time gets faster, or your perception of time gets faster? Hopefully, some of you are, on the younger end of things, so you probably started to notice this, but it hasn't become frightening yet. Whereas I, in my mid 30s, have reached the point where it's like, oh, this is a little bit scary how fast time is flying by. I think also part of it is being a parent. Once you become a parent, and you have an infant who is relying on you to survive, I don't know. I don't know what happens. Time goes by like crazy. So this video is going to analyze. I do have a little bit of scientific research here, but it's not going to be like a hard science deep dive. Just like look at why does time go faster as we get older, and then also ask the question and do a little bit of thinking about, is it possible to slow it down at all as we get older? So, uh, it's existentially very provoking because you just like think about the relative time, especially I feel like once you get into your 30s, you start to realize 10 years ago you were in your 20s. And when you were in your 20s, 10 years ago you were in your teens, which felt much different. But 20s and 30s, while they are different, they don't feel that different. Like I haven't gone through as many developmental changes in the last 10 years as I did the 10 years before that, which I think that's one of the things that makes it go by a lot faster. First of all, I want to point out there's really two kinds of time that we're talking about, which gets a little confusing. And I think this affects both of those things, but not necessarily, they're not interchangeable. So one is the perception of time as it's passing, and then the other is the perception of time retrospectively. Both of those things speed up as you get older, but I think it's actually possible to have your passage of time, and I think actually, well, I'll give you a little clue. I think just because your passage of time as it's going by presently seems fast doesn't mean that necessarily looking back it's going to seem like it flew by. And the opposite can also be true. Like the passage of time could seem very slow in the present, but then looking back it's like, dang, that flew by. So why does time go by faster? The few little things I dug up is that there have been many scientific experiments about this, and generally there's like no consensus yet. But a lot of the theories that are put forth are one of the very common ones that is easy to intellectualize is that the relative any relative time duration is going to become, as you get older, a lower and lower percentage of your life total, right? If the ratio is, an hour, a day, a week, a year on the top of the fraction, and then under it is your age, that percentage gets smaller and smaller and smaller as your age goes up. It's simple mathematics. You know what I mean? To put it plainly, when you're 4 years old, a year is 25% of your life. And a 4 year old really can only remember maybe the last year of their life anyway. So it's like 100% of their life, right? But for me, almost 36 years old, a year is 1/36th of my life. So relative, a year is a much smaller percentage. If you're 99, it's almost 1%. That's crazy. So yeah, that's a very simple explanation, but there's a lot more to it than that. I think that one of the science has also shown that as we get older, our brains get slower, our bodies get slower, the biological processes in our body slow down, which makes us perceive time as going faster. As we get slower, time goes faster. And I wish I could dig this up. I don't know where I've read it before, so take it with a grain of salt. Maybe I'm just totally confabulating this, but I'm pretty sure that I read about a study where people were just asked to sit in a room quietly. There's no clock around or anything, and just guess when 60 seconds were up. And that was the experiment. And what it found is that people who were older guessed that the minute was up sooner than people who were younger. And a lot of this is just because if your brain is starting to fire at a slightly slower pace, it seems like you're at the minute sooner than you really are. If that, you know what I'm saying. Also, as you get older, you just create fewer memories. That when you're young, you have memories all the time because everything is new. As you get older, you get more and more routines. Everything's the same. You're not developing. You don't have to develop after a certain point once you reach adulthood. And so, fewer memories, more routine, that makes time fly by. When you look back, your perception of time retrospectively, when you don't have these mile markers along the way, which are memories, it doesn't look like much. I mean, if you imagine looking back on a field, it might be hard to tell how big the field is if you only have like two markers in it that are standing up in it. It's if you have these, say, poles with flags on them that are stuck in the ground, and if you're looking back on this field, it's only got two flags in it. It's a little bit more difficult to tell, or maybe it's not difficult to tell, but maybe relative to if you saw a field that had hundreds of flags in it, that field would seem way bigger because it's holding so many more flags. Whereas the same size field holding two flags, it's not maybe as big. It's sort of the same thing. The time doesn't seem to have been as much like it. The past year, if you only have two major memories in it, won't seem really as much of like it was a year as a year that has hundreds of memories, major memories you can look back on. It's all relative. Because if you can't remember it, of course, retrospectively, it's going to seem like it flew by. Interestingly, one of these scientific experiments showed that when it comes to retrospective memory, there really isn't that much difference when it comes to smaller amounts of time between older and younger people, like a day, a month, a year. They can all, I don't know how the methods they did, but it was basically like they're coming up the same. But when it came to 10 years, that's where the older people seemed to indicate it went by faster, which I can totally understand because 10 years seems like a lot. And up until the point where you're like, I don't know, 20, in your mid 20s, 10 years seems like forever because when you think back 10 years, you were a child. But as you get into your late 20s, 10 years ago is when you were a teenager, when you became an adult, and it's more like, okay, I was like aware, I was cognizant of my surroundings during that time. I mean, it's crazy when you think about when you're 20, 10 years ago you were 10, but when you're 30, 10 years ago you were 20. It's a lot different. I mean, yeah, 10 years ago, yeah, when you get when you get to your 30s, that's when it's like, dang, I can remember 20 years ago and it's not starting to, it feels like it's not that long ago. I also saw a story about a woman who went into a cave. Spanish athlete Beatriz Flamini went into a cave for 500 days as an experiment. Totally isolated, and because she was in a cave, she couldn't see the sun rise or set, so she had no external indication of the passage of time. It was all her and her internal processes and her routines that she established on her own. And when the 500 days were up, like some people went to get her because she told them to at 500 days, and she thought only like 170 days had passed. So that would indicate that she thought time passed really fast. Or she didn't realize that she thought it passed very fast until the end. Because you think about it, confusing 500 days for 170 days. Okay, that's less than half, man. Is that even a quarter? Yeah, it's more than a quarter, but that's time passed very fast. Which is interesting to me. So that would indicate that, I mean, in a cave, you can't do much, right? So she just has her own routines. She's just doing her own thing. How many memories can you really make in isolation in a cave? So looking back on, her time there, even as she's going through it, she doesn't have many flagpoles to look back on. And so it doesn't seem like much time has passed at all, especially without knowing, if the sun's up or down. That's very interesting indication of how we perceive time or how we would. She totally lost it. She lost her sense of time. So, is it possible to slow things down? I think that it is, but you can only go so far. Like, if your brain is really slowing down, uh, there's not much you can do to stop that. I think what happens is, and I think when you become a parent, what happens is you establish a lot of routines. And to be a parent, you have to get into some routines in order to just like make it through. And babies thrive on routines. The problem is when you have routines, you're not really like living much, right? So it's like routines are great. Routines are good. You want to have habits. The routines help you survive. I think I've even heard about scientific experiments that try to like see what happens if someone could never have any routines, and it like drove them crazy. They couldn't handle it. You need some level of routine, but routine also makes time pass fast because you're not thinking, you're not engaging with the present moment anymore. You're just like going through your routine. And when every day looks the same in some way, like you have multiple overlapping routines, like a routine of brushing your teeth is maybe not going to make time pass so fast. But when your entire day is scheduled the same as the day before, or when you're working a job where the work is the exact same every day, everything blends together, and that's what makes time seem to pass so fast, even if in the moment it seems to be going slow. And it's interesting because there is the saying for parents, like the days are long, but the years are short. And certainly I agree with the years are short. And I understand why people say the days are long, because if you have a crying baby or something at 3 a.m., it's a little boring, right? You're sitting there in a dark room trying to get the baby to go to sleep. There's not much mental stimulation. It feels like a long time. But I have found that with all the routines that we have in this household, time flies by. Like the days are short too. Like a week feels like it's maybe 4 days if you're lucky. Because every day kind of feels the same. We're on a very strict, rigid schedule. So routine is the enemy of this. And I'm not suggesting you throw out all your routines, but it's important to introduce some amount of new stuff, novelty, in order to make memories. It's interesting if you look back on your life. The way I look back on my life, maybe you always assume everyone's the same as you. The way I look back on my life is that things are in eras, and those eras, they're overlapping. They're not like very distinct. There's overlapping eras that have to do with major things, like where I live, where I worked, things that were going on in my life, friendships, relationships, those kind of things had different bookmarks. And so I can think back to, well, I think everyone maybe can relate to this, the whole COVID thing that we went through. 2019 feels way farther away than I think it would if there hadn't been anything in between, right? And that's because there were so many major memories that we all had, because there were all these things happening that were unprecedented and totally out of our routine and made us totally change our life, that we look back on the field of time between now and 2019, and there's a lot of flags in there. But even that aside, that's just an illustration. If you do things like move, or if you do things like have something really big happen in your life, like a kid, or something new, a new job, even a new hobby, if it's major, if it really starts to take up a lot of your time, that can make time seem, upon retrospection, to have gone slower. Now, you can only introduce so much stuff, though, right? That's the thing. But I think a lot of us tend not to do many new things, tend not to explore much, or we find a way to routinize doing new things, finding novelty, exploring. It's like, oh yeah, I will go to the bookstore every Thursday at 4 o'clock and find a book about something new. And it's like, yeah, okay, you're learning new things, but you're also like in this routine. Maybe there's a way to shake it up. I don't know. Maybe there's just random stuff you can do where it's like, today, you know what? I'm going to go over, check out this place I've never been before, this park. It doesn't have to be big. Just looking for new stuff to experience. I think that can really help slow time down. Um, One thing I wonder about is when it comes to, and I'm not going to edit that, me just stopping out. That's, a lot of times when I'm filming these videos and I know I'm going to edit, I get to the end of a long spiel that I'm saying, a big paragraph, and I have to like stop and catch my breath and think about what am I going to talk about next? Because I like forget. I'm so into the thing I'm talking about, and I don't want to edit these videos, so I'm just gonna you're gonna have to suffer through it. Sorry, but it's more real that way. So I'm talking about doing new things, getting out of routines. I do wonder if your body is slowing down, if there are like biohacks, you know what I mean? Like little things you can do to keep the biological processes faster, to keep the neurons firing faster, in order for you to continue to experience life as slowly as possible. And I don't know, like I drink a ton of coffee. Does caffeine help? Does caffeine hurt? You would think theoretically a stimulant would speed up my brain, which would help time seem to pass a little slower, but maybe not. I don't know. Perhaps there are some scientific studies on that. I wonder if just basic taking care of your body would do that. If getting enough sleep, maybe that would help. Recently, I need to do a whole video about sleep because I think that's been a key to my creative block. I think part of it was I just wasn't sleeping enough, and it wasn't like a huge shift that needs to be made. It's just like a little extra time. Maybe, ironically, spending more of your time unconscious, maybe that could make the rest of the time seem to go slower. There's another thought that I had there. Am I going to have to edit this? Oh, man. When it comes to slowing things down, yes, I know what I was going to talk about. And relative time, uh, perception of time as it passes in the present versus retrospective. The old thing of time flies when you're having fun, right? And that's true, but it's also like that time when you look back on it might seem like it was longer. You know what I mean? Whereas it's excruciating when you're sitting in the present and you're in pain in some way, and boredom is a kind of pain, even if you're just bored out of your mind. That time might in the moment seem like a long time, but when you look back on it, will almost not exist because there were no memories there. Unless it was just like such an outlandish amount of boredom that you can't forget it, you know? um, I think about like my honeymoon, going to Italy. That it was like, what was it? It was 16 days, and they went by very fast in the moment. Now the days were very packed full, so it went by quickly. We were having fun, but it didn't seem to like fly by where it's like too fast. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It went by relatively fast. But looking back on it, it seems like that I had so many memories from that 1 week that week seems like a very long time. That or two plus weeks seems like a very much longer time than what it was, because I have memories from from every day there. So many memories that I can look back on. Whereas if I look on any 16-day period in the last year, there are very few of them that will seem very long at all because not many of them have many memories. So that is to say, if in the moment you feel like time is passing fast, like in that day, that might be a good sign. That might mean looking back on it, it will seem to have gone slower. And I think that's really what trips us up, is not so much the present interpretation of time, like, oh man, where did that last hour go? But it's more like, where did that last 10 years go? I think that's a bit more existentially provoking. And that's what we're trying to prevent ultimately. Because, yeah, it would be nice to say, oh, I can slow down the present moment and drink it in. But I think that's like kind of biologically determined in some ways. But your perception of time that has passed is open, that's very subjective. And that's why some people who are the same age, who have maybe similar circumstances, but did very different things during those times, will say, "Oh, that this past year has gone by like that," or "This past year has been very long." It seems like, was that just 1 year ago? So those are my thoughts on time speeding up as you get older, and how to slow it down. Let me know what you think.